Welcome to Bootstrappers, a program designed to bring you up-to-the-minute ideas and concepts to understand what it takes to succeed in business and life. Each week, we'll bring you guests and ideas you can't find anywhere else. Bootstrappers is a production of Anequim, LLC. Now let's lace up those business boots and join Bootstrappers with Jeremy and Gwen Aspen.
Welcome to Bootstrappers. I'm Jeremy Aspen. This is Gwen Aspen. I'm president of Wistar Group in Omaha, and Gwen is the president of Anequim LLC in Canada, United States, and Mexico. Here at Bootstrappers, we discuss issues that affect the lives of stakeholders in business. That can be the owner, that can be the employees, that can be the managers, it can be shareholders for that matter. But we talk about relevant information. We try to get down to takeaways for our listeners and viewers. Today we're going to be talking about employment, about hiring the right people, the right seat. And we have a guest here in the show. Her name is Dr. Krista Peterson. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and an executive advisor with the Cultural Index. Hiring is just such an important part of what we do.
Oh my God. And it's so hard.
It's so hard. It really defines the track that your company will go on, especially when you're first starting out. And just so everyone knows, this is Anequim, one of our companies, is a talent procurement company. It's kind of like a PEO. So right. It's a professional employer organization. So we've got about 400 employees at the time, currently. And we use a tool called Culture Index. And so at the risk of sounding like this interview is going to be an advertisement, it's not. It's just that we've been through this with several different methodologies and products, services. And this is the one we've landed on, we've been using.
Yeah, I would just say, we've been hiring people for so long. And, at the beginning, I think we made a lot of hiring errors. And so as I was dealing with someone leaving and it being all emotional and dramatic, I was reflecting on the hire and I thought, we need something that's more data-driven, more scientific in order to make good hires. And so I was really digging into what kind of diagnostic tests can we have that people take on the front end that will help us hire more successfully, which is how we got to the Culture Index. But, my depression with having to go through people that don't work out led me to look at some research on hiring. And it turns out that only 19% of new hires are considered fully successful, according to frequently cited study. And by the 18th month point of anyone's employment, 46% are deemed a failure. And that was in the Harvard Business Review.
That's it, and that's expensive as hell.
Well, and they say that a bad hire costs most companies 30% of that employee's first year's earnings. So, and there are other costs. There's like the obvious costs of benefits and the salary that you wasted on the person and training them. But what about the psychological costs of your people having to pick up the slack or fix their errors and talk to maybe angry clients because they did things wrong?
And so if you're a hiring manager, and that's a number you take with you, you try to, because it's always hard when you're about ready to hire somebody, you don't want to do it. You don't want to put out the resume. You don't want to start the interview process. But consider that to not do it right, it could be it's so 30%.
And it could also lose you clients. Like if you have a new person that's not a good fit, there's a cost of losing clients because of their mistakes. So, and your reputation. So there are a lot of costs that people don't even consider. And that's why hiring is so important and why maybe using a diagnostic tool is important.
And let's make sure that we expand this to not include, I'm going to take off my shirt. It's getting warm.
Oh my God.
Yeah. PM Health. It's not hashtag PM Health. It's not just for hiring, right?
No,
so
it's
one
not.
thing when we're, especially as we're growing, people are growing in ranks and with the company, and things start to kind of wobble a little bit. And so part of understanding, what the position is that you're looking for is trying to figure out if they're going to be a match with the manager. And that's and that changes over the course of time. You can have a perfectly good manager in one spot for years, and then things start to change. And you need to be able to identify that.
So one other thing I just want to bring up to help the listeners out is there is a lot of research on what interview techniques really work and help people find the best matches. And one of my favorite organizational psychologists is Adam Grant. He has a number of books out. He has a good newsletter. He's at the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania. But he suggests that we should conduct interviews with standard interview questions for a particular role. So, and the questions should be behavioral based or what if questions about situations that they could encounter in that role. And he says that when you use a standard format with thoughtful questions, then you're 2 to 3 times more likely to make a good hiring decision. So I think that having a standard interviewing process, in addition to using a diagnostic tool that helps you identify whether someone really is detail-oriented, for example. Many of the roles that we hire for require detail orientation. And anybody in an interview, if you ask, so are you detail-oriented?
Yeah, I can, yep.
Most people are going to say yes. But that,
if there's one problem I've got, is that I'm not, I'm too detail-oriented.
So people can lie in the interviews. They can put their best foot forward, and then, after time goes on and they're really in the role, you realize that they really don't have any detail orientation, and it really is impacting not only their role but the organization's success.
So what we're going to delve into is how do we make sure to hire the right people, to know when someone is not working out, be able to identify that. There are leading indicators. How to know when the organization has changed so much that someone doesn't fit in it anymore. That's one of the toughest
those are
ones.
Super hard.
We've had that happen, and I may have mentioned it on the show before, but I had just hired somebody to their highest level of incompetence, and they came up to me about 2 weeks later and say that I had set them up for failure. And in a sense, I did. They'd asked for it. It's exactly the job that they wanted, but they were the type of person that needed everything to be laid out for them so that they could execute. The position was one that needed some creativity. They needed to redesign things, and they needed to implement those. Gone. It didn't work out. It lost one of our best employees at the entry level, or he'd been with us for years. We lost him just because he was put in a position where he really couldn't succeed. He or she.
Well, and then another example of this would be when Chris Mangan came on the show, and we asked him what his biggest boneheaded move was, and he said that he had a legacy employee, and he just so desperately wanted this person to have a leadership personality because he just adored him. He was like family to him. And then he put him in that leadership position, and it didn't work out. And he even suggested that it truly impacted the long-term growth of his company. So putting someone in the wrong seat, wrong position, or putting the wrong person in the wrong position can have a long-term impact on the growth and sustainability of your business. Yeah. So this is pretty important stuff.
Yeah, if you think about, especially if you've been in business for a little while, just think of all the opportunities you had to make bad mistakes. If you make those, it's like compound interest again. If you make those mistakes at the front end, you're doomed. It's a lot harder to get back on your feet because those burgeoning years, the ones where you've got all the energy and you've got the time, you might not have kids yet, you're out on your own. Those years can be wasted when you're just hiring for your first time, or when you're hiring and putting them under somebody that has a key role in the company. Don't want to screw that up. And
so I know using a diagnostic tool, they cost money, and small businesses are always cost conscious, especially at the front end. But I would argue, after using a diagnostic tool for quite some time now, it's some of the best money spent because it prevents you from making these huge mistakes and the emotional turmoil of dealing with somebody who is in the wrong seat.
And we're hiring, let's say, about 400 people, right? So the cost is a big number, but in a real way. But even if you're a small company, this sort of an analytics tool, I think, does come across as expensive. But and I don't want to sound like an advertisement. I'm just trying to make the business case that if you can have a more precise tool that'll help you avoid
your own biases too.
Your own biases, for sure, and to avoid that only 19% of new hires are considered fully successful, or that 46% after a year or whatever are considered a failure. If you can avoid that, you can't avoid it. I guess that's the point. And you got to bite the bullet. Like a lot of the things we've talked about on the show, biting the bullet at the front end, it makes sense. Mm-hmm. Software is a big deal too. So we told you we'd be talking to someone smarter than us today about the topic of...
Well, she is a doctor.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so she's a doctor. We're going to talk to someone smarter than us when it comes to hiring. We've made all the mistakes. I will say that now we've kind of got this thing dialed in part because of Culture Index, which is something, if you're an EO, you already probably understand to some extent. So Dr. Krista Peterson, she is a licensed clinical psychologist, works on growth, earnings, and sustained scalability. That's, I think, what they keep in mind when they're helping business owners and executive teams come up with the best hiring. So welcome, Dr. Krista. Did I start with Dr. Krista every time, or can I have permission to call you?
You can just call me Krista. Thank you.
Great. So welcome to the show. Thanks a million. Appreciate you being here. We've been using Culture Index, which is the connection here, for a couple of years now. 3 years.
I think so.
Okay, 3 years. And I will say it is great. So we needed to dig down a little bit into what it is and what makes it different. When I was growing up, coming up, I should say, in corporate America, we had Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs was super interesting. I loved when they read it back and you're an ENTJ, and that means you're smart, and that means you're outgoing, and it means that you can get people to follow you, whatever. But there was no practical application. So you went into a job interview and you said, I'm an ENTP, whatever. Didn't really do much. But with Culture Index, can you tell us a little bit about Culture Index? That's probably the way to do it.
Yeah, sure. What do you want to know specifically? So I understand you've used Myers-Briggs before. Myers-Briggs has been around a really long time. And it's actually useful when it comes to team building. But Culture Index is different in that we work more with business owners to help them make better decisions about their people using data and science.
Yeah, so that's my experience with Culture Index, is that it was more actionable than knowing your Myers-Briggs or whatever, because you could tell, I don't know, the way that you framed it, and maybe we should ask you this. What qualities are you looking at when you're doing your diagnostic test for personality?
So at Culture Index, we're measuring 7 work-related traits. And looking at the constellation of the traits to get a good whole picture of who the person is. And based on that information, we can make predictions about behaviors and whether or not they're going to be a fit for whatever role you're hiring for. In addition to that, not just on the hiring side, but we do focus a lot on, how do you manage these types of people based on their own unique needs? So, how do you communicate with them? How do you reward them? Can you promote them? How far can you promote them? There's lots of different things that you can use the data for, not just on the hiring side.
Right. And when you're trying to find a good fit, what I find interesting, and I guess I'm going back to the hiring side, but I know there are other applications as well that we use in our business. But I like that you start with the job description first and then try to find the personality that fits that. It seems like with some of the other more amorphous personality trait typifiers, I don't know, what are they called? Typifiers? that they just say, oh, well, we're looking for someone outgoing, but it doesn't give you a full profile of what you're looking for. Do you feel like that's part of the success of Culture Index, is that you start with a job description and then really dig down to what types of people you need for that role?
Yes. So we're not prescriptive with it, and it's not one size fits all. So it really depends on what the organization needs at that time. So we have what we call a position analysis questionnaire, or a C job, where you would go in and complete the questionnaire that then generates a constellation like we talked about earlier, that really defines what you need for that role in order for that person to perform. So it really starts with what's required to be successful in the role, and then what kind of person that requires, and then you go out and you go and recruit for that person.
Managers make mistakes. I don't know if anybody knows that, but managers make mistakes. When you're hiring somebody, or it's not even when you do, what are the mistakes that managers make when they're hiring somebody? I mean, I've got my own ideas, and I can pull back from my catalog of errors, what we did, but do you see any sort of a trend? Like what does the human mind do as a natural consequence of just being human when they're trying to hire people and screw it up?
What I see most often is that people resort to the classic, do I like them? Are they going to fit with our culture, with our team? Are they going to get along with people? And so it always is this, do I like them, or this gut feeling? And then they make decisions from there. But how objective is this, do I like them?
So, yeah, well, and then going to the gut feeling, you kind of get into a little bit of trouble potentially legally also, right? Because if you're going with your gut feeling, you might take into some other things like, I don't know, race starts coming into, you can make some big mistakes. But so then, do I like them? That's got to be an important part of it, because you've got to like the person. So you're not factoring it out, but that you're just saying that it's too much, it's weighted too much for likability? So,
I mean, what we're trying to do at Culture Index is the first step is to determine what you need for the role, recruiting for the role. And then you have this pool of applicants that already have the traits that you've asked for in order to be successful in that role. And so you have this group of people that you're going to now have come in and go through an interview. Again, you already have the data that supports that they can do the job. Now it's a matter of, okay, going through your interview process and determining if they're going to fit for you. So then you can play around with your gut a little bit there.
So for example, one of the problems is, let's say if I'm not using a diagnostic tool in any way, then I'm just interviewing for skills based on the resume. I interview someone and I like them, and they tell me they're detail oriented because I'm maybe framing it in a leading way. And then come to find out they're not detail oriented at all. And then I'm struggling with this person for the length of time that they work for me. Is that what happens a lot when people don't use a diagnostic test?
Well, sure. And especially in an interview, people always put their best foot forward. So they're going to tell you everything you want to hear. And likely, and if they're smart, they've done their research on the back end to determine, okay, what's really expected of me in this role? What is the company all about? And they've come in and they tell you everything you want to hear, and they sound like the perfect person for that role. And then, the honeymoon phase ends and you have somebody that can't actually do what they said that they're going to do for you.
Yeah, and you put a ton of money into onboarding them and getting them situated in the company just to have it not work. So I think Chris Rock says that when you meet somebody in an interview, you're not meeting them, you're meeting their representative.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Because if they know what you want and they're trying to please you in the interview process, they're showing you that aspect of themselves. So how do you prevent people from relying on the diagnostic test? I mean, do people generally lie on that? Is that even an issue?
And I think we should go back real quickly because the process for doing this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but an applicant will fill out a form, and that form will give them, what is it called? The diagnostic, the results, something will give them the profile. The profile. And then it is determined, at least I think the way that we use it, is we determine whether or not that kind of profile is a good fit for that position that we've already defined. And then we, I think, would begin an interview process. Mm-hmm. Is that right? So taking off from there.
So do people tell the truth on those personality tests, or do they lie given the role that they want the job so bad?
Okay. So it really depends. There's a couple things. It depends on how the measure is set up. I can't really speak to, what our competitors have done, but I know that the way that Culture Index was designed was to eliminate error or statistical error as much as possible. And so when you are taking the Culture Index survey, we do not force you to choose one thing or one item versus the other item. We give you a free choice checklist by which you can then select the various descriptor words that describe you. And also describing what you need to have or what traits you need to be successful in your role. So 2 questions. And what we have found is that when we did the analyses to determine our reliability and validity, that gives us the strong statistical properties that we have to reduce somebody lying on the measure. So you don't really know what you're responding to.
Yeah, it is amazing because when you have people take it multiple times, it's amazing how it comes out like exactly the same, year after year.
Well, I think it's amazing that you agree to take this test. Okay, you're going to take a personality test, and I, of course, was front loaded with Myers-Briggs and a couple of other ones. I thought, okay, well, let's spend some time on this. It's like 5 minutes a page or 20 minutes. You just check boxes about how you would describe yourself, and at the end of it, boop, you get.
So you were shocked at how quick it was?
Yeah. I thought it was really cool. And it's kind of like a miracle, like how you can do that, check this box, not this one, this one. And it tells you who you are. Like it's even more interesting than the Myers-Briggs approach.
Right. So it should really only take about 7 to 10 minutes to complete. So, and that was part of the reason, the founder, Gary Wallstrom, designed it the way that he did was, who has time to fill out these really long measures. And in addition to that, if you get this really long packet of psychological jargon, what manager has time to read those?
And how do you execute on it?
Well, and this brings up a question because time. Whenever we are about to hire somebody or an entrepreneur, someone's going to hire somebody, you get nervous because there's process that you have to take on to get from, everything from the ad all the way to the onboarding. It's a really big investment in time. Is there any way of, so you do it just kind of off the cuff and you do it and it takes time and you're scared of it? Is there anything that would say that using a methodology like this or any of your competitors is going to take more time or less time? Is it something to be more afraid of or less afraid of?
Well, Gwen, you use it all the time. What do you think?
I think it makes it go more quickly. So whenever, let's say someone quits and you're freaking out, it makes it go more quickly because it helps you get through that stack of resumes sooner. Yeah, Now, it may take longer because you fall in love with somebody, their resume, and you're like, oh my God, I want them to work out. And then you see that they're completely introverted and you're hiring for someone who's going to be in front of people all day. And then when you get the the statistical analysis back, as a manager, you have to decide, am I going to go with my gut feeling or the data? Now, I don't like rules and I don't like things telling me what to do. So I have gone with my gut feeling as opposed to the recommendations of the outcome of the test and Krista, talking to her about it. And I'm always upset when I do that, but I have done that on occasion. So is that what happens with most people who ignore the results, Krista? They just like fall in love with somebody, or it's like their best friend's cousin or something like that? They want to hire that.
Well, yeah. So ideally what I try to get my clients to do is to look at the survey results first, because you've already told me that that's what you need. Okay. So why are we going to go back and look at a resume and spend time figuring out who they are on things that they've done in the past? But then you have to have your heart broken when you go back and look at the survey results. So why not look at the survey results first? And then if, oh, yay, that's the person that I think that I want, then you go back and you look at the resume to, further validate that this is someone you want to bring in for an interview. But to your other point, yes, a lot of my clients continue to fall back to old hiring mistakes, and they'll come and they'll tell me, yeah, we ended up taking this person and it didn't work out. So you were right. And it's becoming expensive for me to be wrong. So we are actually going to follow the data. And then I'll get a call, a couple months later saying, okay, we have followed the data and you were right. This is exactly what you said was going to happen and what the data said. And so it only takes a couple times that you get burned before you start following along.
Turns out science is better.
It does turn out
contrary
science is better.
to.
And then there are some issues too, which I know this is why we use your consultation as well, is that, I'll just disclose, I have a very dramatic personality profile.
Also known as a bitch. Just kidding.
No, a huge
Just
personality
kidding.
profile. So obviously I'm not going to mesh with everybody. So Krista, you would look at a manager's profile and then be like, this person's not going to work well under you, or that this person would work well under you, right?
Yeah, it's all about, finding a balance of who thinks like you, who you can delegate to. It's all about finding a good balance and really what you need at the time
in the role.
Right.
So,
why do people, can I just
real
quick, right? Why do people tend to fail at their jobs? And what I'm getting at is it a dynamic with the boss? Is it the job description itself wasn't what it was billed to be? Was it the candidate's abilities at the end of the day? Like, is there anything you can tell us to look out for? Big picture.
Yeah. So if you have that, it'll come down to poor fit. Okay. So someone's not the right fit. If it's someone that already works for you and you haven't gone through the whole process of looking at their profile, et cetera, then you have what you have, and you've got to work with it or deal with it however you choose. It also can go back onto the manager. So if you have elevated somebody to a leadership type position that just isn't built to lead people, and in addition to that, not given them or invested in them to develop them to be able to lead people. We talked earlier about, a person has their own unique needs in terms of communication, in terms of how they want to be rewarded, how they deal with conflicts, how they resolve conflicts. And so if a leader doesn't know those things about their employee, then you haven't given them the tools they need to succeed as a leader. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, a lot of sense.
So that brings up a big point, because we talk about coaching people in skills like conflict resolution. So is there a personality type? Conflict resolution is just a huge thing with managing people, but is there a personality type that's better at conflict resolution that you need is there something in the test that tells you that, or is that more of a skill? Is it a personality type or a skill or both?
Well,
maybe
there are some, like yourself, Gwen, where you would rather approach conflict and get it kind of figured out rather than sweep it under the table, right? It's not necessarily always comfortable for you, but you'd rather take care of it in the moment than have it kind of stay with you. There are other people that would prefer to kind of sweep it under the rug because conflict is uncomfortable. And so, especially when you have somebody that doesn't like conflict in a leadership position, then it becomes, well, I'll make excuses for this person, or I'll do this, or I'll do that, rather than just approach it head on. So yes, there are certain people who are more approaching of conflict versus some that are more avoidant of conflict.
So if that's a cultural desire of my organization, if I'm obsessed with having an organization that identifies problem areas and hashes it out, then I need to hire a different type of person because of my culture as a company. Would you say that's true?
Not necessarily, because you can also have, if you have somebody that is in the leadership position, they should be driving that into their direct report. So how do we deal with conflict on this team? This is how we do it. This is a safe space, et cetera, et cetera. The manager should understand what's going on in his or her team at all times.
Okay.
That's the person that should be responsible for coaching conflict resolution into their team.
So, over the course of time, this has changed a little bit, but my understanding is that if you're talking to most people, they will tell you that there is a difference between men and women. And let me just say this. I read a book here, Gender on the Brain by...
We'll have it in the
link. Gender on the Brain. And its argument was essentially that there's almost no difference. If you take the brain out of a female skull and out of a male skull, you can't tell the difference because really there isn't much of a difference. But I think that most people that do hiring think that there is a difference. What is it scientifically, doctor, that the differences between men and women? All of them. Throw them at me. What are all the differences?
So there is no difference between men and women when it comes to personality traits. Okay. The difference is in how people perceive someone's personality traits. So for example, a male, visionary, dominant personality, confident, direct, assertive, comes off as those things I just said.
And a woman
Whereas
would be
a woman that what's that?
And a woman would be considered a bitch.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And
Not always.
I'll bet you that. No, not always, of course. But yeah, that's the difference. It could be you could be assertive. Well, okay, a guy can do that, and I do think a guy can get away with that, but a female does it, and it looks. I think,
you just have to modify the way that you assert.
Maybe.
In my experience.
Maybe, but I think that's a great takeaway. There really, if you do the personality test, you do not need to take into consideration when you're hiring, for God's sakes, whether it's a man or a woman. It's just the qualities that person possesses in their personality, and of course, their talents.
Do you get pushback when you work with people on this, that they're sure that there are differences? Or do they just, you can't see them once you're looking at a bunch of profiles, but does it come up a lot?
Actually, it doesn't. And it's impressive to me that it doesn't. So, no, the bottom line is that traits are genderless, and you should always be looking for the right person for the job rather than anything else.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. So what about, does personality change over the course of someone's life?
It does not. So at least from the research that I'm familiar with, personality is stable over time and actually is stable around the ages of 8 to 12 years old. There's new research to suggest that it might even be as early as age 5. So you guys have kids, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a 13-year-old.
11 and 12.
Oh, almost 13 and 11. Yeah. So,
okay.
So they're baked.
They're not baked.
But were you able to see some of their individual characteristics when they were 5, 6, 7?
Absolutely.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, when they're 5, 6, 7, about then it starts to kind of come up. Yep.
I definitely think that you kind of know the child. I mean, I would say even earlier you could see some distinct characteristics, but I think for the ones that we're looking at here, probably about 6 or 7 for both of them, it was pretty obvious.
So, okay, so over the course of time, personalities don't change much. But what about major life events or additional stressors, parents dying or children going off to college? Are there events in a person's life that might cause them to not act or the way that their profile might indicate?
Yes.
And if you take a test during that time frame, does it change it?
Yeah. Okay.
Two-part
That's
question.
a really good question. Okay. So yes, there are a couple factors that will change personality or affect results on some sort of personality measure. So what we do know is that being in an active phase of mental illness, so anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, being in an active phase of a mental illness can change the results on any personality measure. Okay. Chemical dependency, whether it's in acute or chronic, it can physiologically change your brain and thus change personality. In addition to that, we know that intoxication can, change the way that people are behaving in the moment. So someone takes the survey while they're intoxicated, I can't tell you if that's really who the person is.
Has that happened?
Well, I'm sure when people take it at like 10 o'clock at night, while they're searching for jobs with a beer in their hand, I'm sure it would impact it a little bit. I don't know. Anyway, continue.
Okay. What else? Oh, any kind of medical ailment that would affect the brain or the portions of the brain that are responsible for personality. And then post-traumatic stress disorder, whether it's acute or chronic, any kind of trauma can affect personality.
So that's where if I'm doing a personality test on someone one year and then we always follow them up every year, then and I see a dramatic change in the top graph, which is your personality, which is embedded in you, then it may be one of those things that's the cause. Would that be your go-to assumption?
Yeah. Yes. It's really, really rare at least I've been with the company since 2013, and I don't even know if I could count on one hand that happening. It just doesn't happen. Can it? Yes. But most of the time you're going to see stressors happen in the bottom graph, which is their behavioral modification of whatever's happening in their environment in the current moment. That's where you're going to see shifts related to just, things that are going on in their life right now. That's that snapshot in time. But I just haven't seen, or at least no one's said anything about, I know that this person was intoxicated when they took the survey. I just haven't.
They just happen to always be stoned.
No.
Or something. Well, there's that too.
Well, yeah. So are some, in any job, like let's say you have an introverted person and they have a job that requires them to be extroverted. I know in our conversations together, we call that modifying your personality. So everyone has some ability to modify what they naturally are. It's just that it takes maybe some people more energy to be something that they're not. Can you just speak to how people modify their personality and what the costs are?
Yeah, sure. So you're right. We all can modify our behavior to meet the demands of the environment. Okay. It's just that we cannot sustain them for long periods of time without feeling mental stress. Okay. And mental stress, we know, leads to lots of issues, not just in the workplace, but outside of the workplace, medically, et cetera. Right. So we want to try to manage stress as much as possible. When
people are modifying their personality, what are the costs associated with that? So like if I'm in the wrong role as a person and I'm just constantly having to be something that I am just not naturally, what does it cost me personally, and what costs will the business feel because I'm in the wrong role?
Okay. And so yeah, the other part you had asked earlier was about how long can someone sustain that?
Oh, sure.
And that really depends on, we measure something called mental stamina or energy units. And that's really someone's ability or the length of time they can act out of character before needing to recharge their batteries, before they need a mental break. And so the bigger their battery is, the longer they can act outside of character. Okay. But the costs, like I said before, it might be costing you money because you might be having somebody not in the right role. It costs them. They might be calling in sick to work more. They might be becoming disengaged. They might be becoming a cultural issue. It will all lead to problems that are going to cost you money by keeping the wrong person in the wrong seat.
And they can also lead to accidents, right? Like, especially in our industry of property management, we worry about safety because we deal with people in, trades and getting hurt on the job site. That's one of the things I remember, is that if people are in the wrong fit and they're having to be something that they're not, they're more likely to get in accidents. Is that a true thing?
Very good. It can lead to all kinds of maladaptive behavior.
So there's obviously this component that like we're using, and I want to make clear this is not an advertisement, but we use Culture Index. And it's a very important part of what we do to try to find the right people for the right seats in our buses, right? But there must be a role for the interview itself. So what are the things that during a normal interview you can pick up on that you can't pick up on and that need to be taken into consideration that we can't pick up on in some sort of test like this?
Well, like we talked about earlier, the first part of that is having your data set or who the person is. And then you're using the interview to determine, of that pool of people that you know are the right fit, which is going to be the right one for you. So I personally prefer more structured guided interviews that you can score people on, because again, it goes back to science and data, and the more consistent you can be with your interview questions, the better. You're asking the same people the same questions, so you don't have any kind of internal biases coming into play. But you're trying to figure out if they're going to work for you and why they want to work for you. Okay, what are they bringing to the table? So those are the things that I find most important. In addition, maybe cultural fit. I had a situation once where I had a client hiring for a director of sales, and it was in the farming industry, and they had two candidates. Both had the exact same profile, met their benchmark to a T. One was, a Texas good old boy, and the other one was, a hot shot from Chicago that worked in corporate America. And those were their final two candidates. So which one was the right choice?
Right.
The company is a farming company, probably Texas good old boy.
Yeah.
They went with the other one. And
did it work out?
No, it showed right away.
Okay.
Oh, they went with the wrong one. Did I hear that right?
Yeah,
they went with the wrong, and then they're like, oh shit.
And they could tell right away.
So
the Peter principle is the principle that you elevate people to their highest level of incompetence. This happens a lot because people, the personality of the people that you work with, but you fall in love with somebody. Do you see that a lot where people are elevated to a role that they just can't manage, or can you train them up to that position? I mean, how much of this is nature versus nurture?
Yeah, unfortunately, I see that all the time. And again, it goes back to, you've now set them up for failure. It's not that they have done something wrong, but you have elevated them to that position. And so it's really important to be having conversations with your employees about what really is their desire to move up into either management or wherever you're going to put them, and just trying to figure out what their motivations are. And this is something that you can determine if you're paying attention to the data that we're giving you and you're having conversations with your consultant about, can this person do this? Should we do that? And it's never a one size fits all. So it really depends on what you want them to do. And being mindful of when their performance slips, that you then jump in, and cover for them or fix the problem that you've created and put them back to where they're more comfortable. Not everybody is designed to do this. Some people, it's best to promote this way. Okay, there are a lot of different ways you can compensate people or promote people that doesn't include
moving on
vertical.
So do you, like with sales roles, you'll look at a personality profile and it will be like your top salesperson, and people always want to put those people in a management role, but it doesn't work. So is that something that you can see in a personality test, that this person's not going to be a fit for management? Yes, they're a number one salesperson, but that doesn't mean they can manage other salespeople.
Yeah. And then think about what you've done. You've taken this person's livelihood and basically made them Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, right? How boring is it to be in that management seat when you want to be out there hunting?
Yeah. So those are some of the mistakes that people can avoid if they're really homing in on the true personality of their employees.
Well, I know that whenever we've hired, whenever we're hiring somebody, if we define the seat really well, sometimes and uncomfortably, it looks like the manager's not actually the person that should be in that seat. And I think that's a harder thing to, like, if you're starting to define your company and you know what this person is supposed to be doing, and the access you have to people around you that have been with you for a long time isn't adequate to manage that kind of personality or that kind of a position, it starts to bubble up, and that's when management gets really hard.
Do you have those hard conversations with owners of companies that?
Oh yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, because again, it goes back to you've done them a disservice by putting them there. Okay. And nobody wants to wake up in the morning and fail and know they're going to work to fail or not work up to their full potential. And so you've actually taken something away from them by keeping them in that role. Okay. They could be better used somewhere else. It doesn't mean you have to let them go per se. It just is, that's not the right place for them.
And their best life might very well be with another company. And if it is somebody you care about and you love and you've worked with for years, while it is very hard to accept that, sometimes that's the direction you kind of have to come up with and
right.
move forward with.
And then you let them go with dignity, and you have a good exit interview with them, and you give them a glowing reference. And sometimes people outgrow companies and companies outgrow people.
Boy, that's
so I have a question really quick, because I know we have to go to a break, but when you have someone that you've elevated to a position that they're not competent for, or it's a bad fit, do you ever recommend demoting, or is that a moment where they have to go somewhere else? Do you have a perspective on that?
I don't typically give that kind of
Does it ever work out? Does it ever work out that you do demote them and it still works?
I mean, I would never call it demote. I would find another way to make it sound like a sweet deal, and that would be how I would approach it. I wouldn't use demote, but I don't know what I mean. I guess I don't really get involved in that conversation.
Okay.
All right. Really quickly, it's probably a yes or no, but does your tool work independent of the country that somebody's in or the culture that they work in?
So are you talking about like language wise?
language and even just because in a lot of countries, especially third world countries, my experience is, I hate that word, but people are protecting their downside, and they adapt their personalities a little bit to try to put out their best face forward for what it is the job is looking for. So I don't know.
Well, we found that there are some personality profiles that are culturally biased. So,
and this one,
well, my experience. So I'm going to answer this question, Krista, because I use it all the time. But I find that the way that it's asked, where it's just questions about your personality, make it not a culturally biased approach. Whereas when I looked at other personality profiles, I would have 8 people with totally different personalities that you could just see by their resume or by interviewing them, and they all would come back with the same personality profile.
Yeah.
So there are culture biases, and that's important to know if you're going to be hiring outside of the United States. Not all tests will give you the results that you're looking for because of that. So Krista, if people want to find you, where can they find you?
Well, they can contact you. You can find me on LinkedIn or email. My email is kpeterson@cultureindex.com.
Excellent. Dr. Krista Peterson with Culture Index. Thanks a whole bunch for coming in.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right, take care.
So, Dr. Peterson, that was enlightening. It's such an important part of what we do, and there's a science to it.
Yeah.
When we go into business, it's always so hard to know, especially when you're at your own business, what you're supposed to do to hire people.
I know.
It sucks. I thought the answer to gender, what's the difference between men and women? Because it is counterintuitive, and I know that in casual conversations I've had with friends, but also casual conversations with people in business, people believe that women are more detail oriented. They believe that women are more organized, and they believe that women are more creative. And if I'm going off that book, Gender on the Brain, it's just not true. Personalities they rise above sex. They're just a part of the brain, an organ of the body.
And it's more the perception rather than...
And it's kind of, what's that called? The observer effect in physics, where if you actually see the experiment, then it itself alters the reality a little bit. And also that 5 and 6 year olds, that's when a personality is formed, and it sounds like it moves all the way through life for
pretty much the same personality,
unless there's some certain circumstances that pop up. But you've been using Anequim you've been using Culture Index for 3 years now. So, what's it helped you do? What's the practical?
The practical application. One is there are some personalities that just really aren't meant to lead. And especially when I work with people day in, day out, I just get obsessed with certain people, and I want them to rise to the highest leadership role because I just adore them so much. But the Culture Index has helped me find ways that we can increase their responsibility without them managing people if that's not what they're good at. So that has been a huge thing, because I think I would have increased people's responsibility, put them in a position that they were going to fail at. And to my last question, I don't believe you can demote people. I think if you put them in a position that they can't succeed in, most of the time the right course of action is to find a different place for them. And so it's really important for me, if I'm responsible for people, to put them in a place that will, or in a position that will work for their personality. The other thing that I would say is that we use it at every annual review to make sure that they're not modifying their personality too much for the current role they're in. So what that's helped us do is have conversations we can't have any other way. People might respond to a survey. Oh yeah, I love my job. It's great. It's perfect. And then you get the results back and you're like, there's no way you love your job. You have to be someone that you totally are not to be good at this role. How do we modify the role to work with your personality? How do we make sure we manage your stress level? Because it's clearly extremely stressful for people to be something that they're not. Or should we put you somewhere else that is a better match? So it's really changed the way that we manage people long term.
Okay, so what about the employer? So, and we didn't ask this, and I should have asked this process, you're hiring somebody, you test the employee or the applicant and the manager? Like they're hiring,
Yes.
How does that work?
So that really, you have to be pretty good at the culture index, and that's kind of to really be able to manage those personalities. There are some obvious ones, like if you have a demure manager, maybe in accounting, and then you've got some super aggressive personality that applies for the accounting job, they're not going to work well underneath the demure person. So there are some things that are super obvious, but that's where the consultation comes in, and where the art really is in creating an accountability chart with the right people underneath the right managers.
And I suppose it is important to say that it's not perfect. You can't find a perfect solution to finding the right people all the time. But it is markedly different now.
It's way better. I would say, nothing ever in life is perfect, but this is I would say, if you follow the rules.
Which she has a problem with sometimes.
I have a problem with that, then that's when if you follow the rules, you will do better at hiring.
All right, so now you're a better manager. Now you're a better hiring manager. This is Bootstrappers. We will see you next week.
This has been Bootstrappers, a unique presentation designed to help you better understand how the world turns. Contact Gwen or Jeremy at hosts@bootstrappers.club or visit our website, Anequim.net. Be sure to subscribe to our podcasts on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, and our YouTube channel. Thank you, and join us next time for Bootstrappers.